Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. And considering like it's the holiday season and we're still in this pandemic and the economy is sort of like collapsing all around us, it's so fascinating to have little things like Mariah Carey's album dropping because it's like no matter what's wrong with the world, you can always count on Mariah Carey to drop some sort of Christmas thing even if it's a repeat of her song is which is all I want for Christmas is you, in order for you to know that there is some sense of stability and there is a sense of sameness in the world where no matter what happens, Mariah Carey will always be there with some Christmas cheer. So the interesting part about this one was that Jennifer Hudson and Ariana Grande was on that song too. But I think that that's sort of what's giving me a sense of common stability is that predictability of Mariah Carey and Christmas. So, um, with that said, I want to sort of introduce today's topic, which is the idea of intent. Now, before we begin with today's topic, please hit like, share, and subscribe. So, now let's talk about this notion of intent. And I think it's a really tricky one because everybody, I think, thinks about themselves as a good person. And they also might think of themselves as having good intentions. But then at the same time, if you look at their actions from an outside perspective, you might not think what they're doing is the best case scenario. Now, this is actually really interesting because with this idea of intent, right, you have this idea of being a good person separate from separate from the idea of what the person thinks about, which is the intention. So already we're kind of seeing different layers to this whole spiel about like what it means to intend something versus what it means to be a good person. So it's almost like, when we've seen a lot of the arguments during the election cycle where we've said certain people are just bad people because they have X political beliefs. And I honestly think that, and especially coming from somebody that's more on the left of everything, it's actually interesting because I think that idea and belief was on both sides or all sides, or pretty much every community believes that they are fundamentally good people and they want fundamentally the best things for everybody else. And it's really difficult because when you start throwing things like, oh, you're a bad person because you believe X, Y, and Z, then it's like we're making sort of no we're basically sort of making blanket statements about that person's character. And I think I want to point to ContraPoints' video on cancel culture where ContraPoints talks about specifically the idea of essentializing certain people because of certain things that they've said. But for me, like, I'm not necessarily thinking about it as the person itself, but the idea of looking at the person's intent and their thought process. Because as a sociologist, I mean, I'm really interested in what people think about. I'm interested in how they piece things together. And I talk about things with friends that, where we're actually looking at the thought processes of other people and we find ways around it. So that's something that's important for me because I mean, you see this happen in so many different circles. You see this in progressive circles, you see this in social justice warrior circles, you see this in stuff like liberal or conservative circles. Um, you might even see this in Trump circles. But just the idea of, I am not a bad person. I just want to do the right thing, and therefore certain things happen. I mean, politics aside, that I've been in situations where somebody might have intended something and that their behaviors were certainly not in line with what they said they were doing. So then it's almost like, okay, so does this person not know? Are they not aware? Are they just not capable of doing this? And this sort of then affects the way I analyze and think about people because I really just want to sort of see the world as people just doing things. And if they do things that are wrong, they're just doing them because of certain situations. So I just sort of want to really focus on that idea of the intent because it's almost like, okay, so like maybe this person intentionally didn't want to do something. Um, and it's a really strange concept, this idea of intent is, simply because it's like you can never really fully see what the other person's intentions are. And not only that, but people can lie. So I really do want to believe that everybody does have positive intentions for everybody out there. But then there obviously are people that deliberately do want to harm people. And it's hard to distinguish those people from the people that actually want to do right. And I think this kind of goes back to basic communication ideas where it's like I can control my intention, I can control the message, but at the same time, I can't necessarily control how they're received. And like the minute like another person, just one other person comes into play, suddenly like it leaves myself open to basically critiques in my communication. And it's interesting because last week we even talked about the idea of communicating and specifically like how I had problems communicating with people because I feel like I'm, isolated in certain respects. But I think that we all to some degree are isolated because again, we can sort of master our intentions personally and individually, but we can't actually master what we actually put out there. And I just want to sort of discuss this because when we're sort of going out into the world, we're sort of looking at this idea of a constant exchange of ideas, and we're constantly looking at our ability to actually say things. And I think that when we are saying certain things, we're not necessarily doing so in a way that's fair to other people all the time, you know? So I want us to really start focusing on our intentions. And I know that in general, like there are like circles that focus on intent. I mean, you see this crop up in spiritual circles, new age circles, and all those other belief systems, and especially even with the more mainstream monotheistic systems, where people just focus on the idea of not only positive thinking, but also the idea of positive connections with people and their communities and the world itself, and also with a higher power in certain respects. But it's almost like you have to mean that you want this connection. So, I mean, even when you think about communication, when you're looking at that specific aspect, you have to think about what you mean and like the work that you have to do around the work around the message that you're putting out there in order to really ensure that your intention actually gets reached. May it be with another person or may it be on a more higher spiritual level. But not only that, but you have to really also focus this idea on realizing that even though you also might intend something, you can't control what the other person or the other party or the other, you know, or the recipient of that communication isn't going to necessarily see it that way. So they're not going to see it that way. And I think that, or at least they might not see it that way. But I think even with that respect, it's also important to remember that like you can't always control these communications. So I think what I'm trying to get across here is that even though you might intend for something, you have to do work to make sure that intent is carried across, but also realize that if it doesn't happen, you can't blame yourself, and that you need to realize that communication is a two-way street where as long as you do what you need to do on your end, the other person should be able to kind of respond in their way and have their own interpretation of what you said and then respond accordingly. So again, you're operating from the standpoint that you're really watching your meaning and you're watching what you're communicating, especially within your message, but then you're also trying to really focus on the other person. So let's slowly, take a step back this holiday season and, think about what we're saying and how we're saying it. And especially now, I mean, things are kind of in a position where there's a lot of uncertainty. So even in this uncertainty, we then also then have to look at that relationship between ourselves and other people, but also understanding that when we're establishing that these relationships, we have to figure out what these messages are. And obviously notice that like there's this aspect of being able to communicate with yourself, and understanding and examining your own intentions is part of this process. So I think that especially this holiday season where a lot of us lack the funds to, give a gift and to show our intentions, like, I think that what we can do is work on what we can actually give ourselves and other people, not just tangibly, but also on a less material level and on a more communicative level. So again, if you thought this video was interesting, please like, share, and subscribe and think about it. Maybe there might be aspects of things that you want to get across that might not actually get across the way that you want them to. And so maybe this holiday season you can think about some of the ways in which you can improve your communication with yourself and other people and to really master the idea of getting your intentions across. So I hope you have a great holiday season. We'll be back next uh, Thursday. So it would be according to my computer, it will be the 10th, and we will talk more about this idea of intention communication. Hopefully, anyways. Anyways, I hope you have a great rest of the week. Take care. Bye bye.